Welcome back. I'm here with my JI Case LA. On the previous video of this tractor, we got this engine broke loose after being seized for several years using some slightly unconventional methods, maybe not ones I would suggest to use, but it's free now. And the next step is to check some things out and see if we can get it running and driving. So let's get at it. Now the first thing I want to check out on this tractor is I want to make sure we have spark. So this is a magneto. It's a JI Case. I believe they built their own magnetos, but this makes its own spark, so you don't need any external battery power to run a coil or anything. This makes its own spark, and it tends to, over time, sometimes the points will get corroded, or the magnets will go dead, or sometimes the armatures will go bad. You know, best case scenario, this thing makes spark. Worst case scenario, we got to tear it all the way down. But let me get a tester and we'll spin it over and see if we're getting spark. We'll go ahead and try cylinder number 4 plug. And I don't know. That's probably a good ground there. I'm not seeing any spark. I've never had a JI Case magneto apart before, but it looks like this comes off. And kind of guessing the points are behind this. Maybe. Yep, that's the points cover. So these are your breaker points, and they look to be in good shape, but this whole piece rotates with a little lever, and that adjusts the timing or completely shuts it off. You'll want it a little bit retarded when you start it, especially if you're crank starting it. That'll prevent kickback. And then once you have it running, you'll put it to full advance. But you want to make sure these contacts right here are clean. So this is just a points file. You'll just run it between the set of contacts, if you can get in there, and you just scratch them up, clean them up. You can also use a piece of sandpaper. Sometimes that works better. These points files, you know, they're not real aggressive and they tend to round over fairly quickly, but don't need a lot. Just need to scratch it up a bit, make sure they're getting good contact. Looks like there's a touch of moisture in there, so I'm just gonna spray a little bit of WD-40 over here. That'll help drive the moisture out. Also, while I'm in here, I'm gonna put just a little dab of light grease on that cam lobe. I'm sure it has not been lubricated in many years. Wipe the excess of the WD-40 out. You don't need much. Just a little will get you all the water displacement that you need. And this cover's keyed, so you gotta line it up with that piece. And that retains it. So that's run, that's start, and that's probably all the way off. So about there, we should have spark.
so somehow I lost the footage of explaining what's going on here, but I hooked a tow bar up to the tractor and was pulling it around with the transmission in gear, and what that's doing is spinning the magneto at a decent constant RPM without laboring the starter. Sometimes this works to bring back dead magnetos. I've had it work several times in the past. Never done it to one of these case magnetos, so it's worth a shot. Worst case, you still don't have spark.
Well, I pulled it around the yard a few times and no spark out of the thing, so never been inside a case magneto. I'm not sure really what I'm looking at here, but just gonna maybe pull this top piece off, see what's in here. I'm assuming there's a coil in there, but might have to take this to someone and have it recharged, because sometimes the magnets go bad in there. Well, welcome back again. So I'm back with this JI Case LA, and it's months later, several, and the last time I worked on it, it was early fall. Now it's late winter. So I've been busy, very busy, and haven't had a chance to work on this thing. But now I've got a chance, so let's dig back into it and pick up where we left off. Other than hauling this thing to my shop, nothing has been done to it. Just threw the sheet metal on it and brought it over here. In the last video, we got that engine unseized using maybe some unconventional methods. But I don't believe anything was damaged, and in this video we're going to find out. We're going to get this thing going. I don't particularly remember where I left off. I remember the engine was unseized, the starter did not like 12 volts, and there was no spark. So kind of where I'm going to pick off on this. I do know it's been sitting. I'd like to drain the crankcase and kind of flush that out. And it's nice, these covers come off the sides. I'll pull that out. We'll be able to flush it all out and make sure we got some fresh new oil in it. Did pick up a manual. Should know a little bit about what's going on, but let's get at it. And since this has been sitting so long, we should be able to see if there's any issue with antifreeze getting in the oil. I didn't notice any moisture in there before, but now that it's settled out for several months, if there is any, it'll be the first thing to come out. There's water. There's definitely some water was in there, but it's not antifreeze. It's just water. But that would explain how this engine originally became seized. Something else I'd like to address before I get this running is this #1 exhaust valve retainer. You can see that it's sitting higher up in there. The actual retainer, the cone where the keepers sit, is worn out. So I don't want this to drop a valve and ruin everything else in series, so I'm going to change this out before I try to start it. I did get all new ones for the exhaust valves because they're all these rotary type that they're rusted up a bit, but I'm not worried about changing the other three until I know this thing runs, and I'm not going to tear it down anyways. So, but this one, I don't want to see that valve drop, so that'll get changed out. Alright, now that it's done dripping, something to keep it off the starter. Kind of like a cork, which I think is from the top of the filter. Yeah, cork particles in there. That one's been in there a while. That's kind of a neat old filter. That orange like that. I wonder if I can peel that off. But the cork on the top of the filter has disintegrated over the years. And the bottom part of the cork is still in that housing. Have to scrape it loose and flush it out. See down in that housing, a little bit of sludge. You can see that pieces of cork in there as well. I got the housing cleaned up inside. Looks pretty good. But you see that light spot down in there. Let me cover up the plug hole. That's a hole. So I have to braze that up. I noticed this filter housing was leaking, and I assumed it was just the gasket, but it must have been that hole. I'm gonna pull this starter off because everything's dirty behind it. I want to take this cover off and clean it up, put a new gasket on it. And I wouldn't mind popping it apart and making sure it's not full of oil. It would have been ideal to pressure wash this, but I don't have one available to me right now, so. It's an Autolite starter, 4829 7D. Don't remember, I think I had this band off once already. Definitely has a little oil in it, not as bad as I was expecting. Really probably should be popped apart and cleaned up. Oh yeah, definitely plenty of oil in there. The brushes are soaked. Yeah, let's get that cleaned out. Got the starter all put back together. All the oil cleaned out of it. Everything looks pretty good, aside from the brushes are wore down a fair bit. But everything, you know, normally there's corrosion in them. No corrosion in this. Everything looks pretty decent. If it needs a bit of a tune-up in the future, a new set of brushes, not a big deal. Set of springs. Springs seem to have pretty good tension yet. I'm gonna leave the back band off this because this starter actually goes into a bell housing that has oil in it. There's an O-ring here on these starters, and these have an oil bath main clutch, an over centering type, so it's not just spring pressure, it's a snap engagement type of deal. Right there you can see problem spot, and it's pitted out more on the inside, so I decided I'm going to TIG weld that with some 30 thousandths MIG wire, make sure it's burned in good and isn't protruding and getting interrupted into my sealing face of that bolt where the drain plug goes. All blended back in and never even knew it was there. New sealing washer for the drain plug on the filter housing. New old filter going in, Fleet Guard this time. I do like that this one has rubber instead of the cork, where the cork disintegrated on the last one. I'm not sure how much oil this holds, but it filled my drain pan right to the tops. Can't do anything without spilling a little, making a mess. This is why I haven't put the starter back on yet either, because I know darn well if I put that starter on, I was going to dump oil right into it. It's always good to add a little bit of oil to that gasket or O-ring. And of course, they never seem to fit quite right. Best bet is put that wrinkle where you can see it, and hopefully it flattens out. Pull these inspection covers off so we can get in here and flush this crankcase out. Cover's all pulled off. Here's inside the crankcase. Really doesn't look too awful bad. I'll get a solvent solution mixed up in a pump sprayer and we'll flush the little bit of sludge that's down in the pan out. Yeah, it's got a bit. Definitely had some moisture down in it. Seeing these, you can see right through the engine. I guess you could technically pull, you know, if you pulled the head, you could get the rods out and put bearings and stuff in these without pulling the pan. Did get one gasket to come off complete, so I'll be able to use that as a pattern for 4 new handhole gaskets. Got a garden sprayer here. This is just filled with a petroleum-based cleaning solvent. We're not introducing any moisture into here. All like oil-based product. Got the crankcase all flushed out. Kinda neat. Not a lot of engines you can open up like this. This new gasket made, 1/8 inch cork, should do just fine. Not much for parts is widely available for these. There's a few guys that sell them, but to just order a gasket like this, it isn't really easy to come by. So you're better off just making it. And it's probably cheaper that way. Well, another couple months have gone by, so I figure it's time to finish up these handhold gaskets. Yesterday was the first full day of summer, so you could say we're moving along pretty quickly on this project. Got the 3 more gaskets made for making 4 total. I think they turned out pretty nice. Make sure everything still looks good in there. It does. Something that I did not realize at first, but through some research I do now, is that these engines run a wet clutch. So if you look right here with that slot, that is part of the flywheel. So the clutch shares oil with the crankcase, but knowing that, I want to pull these covers back here off and flush that clutch housing out. So we're completely fresh, crankcase, clutch housing, everything. And when we put new oil in there, it won't be contaminated immediately. A little moisture got trapped behind that gasket. That's why it's probably best not to use a full sheet like that, but cut the inner portion out, at least most of the way, so you don't have condensation like this, rusting the panels. So there's your clutch. It's like I mentioned prior, it's an over-centering clutch, but you can see a little bit of shiny oil in the bottom there. We need to drain that out, and we'll give this housing a quick flush with some solvent. I've started flushing the housing out with some solvent, and this is the drain plug, so we'll see what all comes out. Oh. A mess is what came out. Well, I've got the case for the clutch all flushed out. Got the covers all cleaned up. This one here, this whole corner was like smashed in and rolled over. I could barely get on that bolt. So I did some hammering and some welding in here. And on the edge where it was tore out, that should be good. New gasket. I left the center out of these so we get oil on this so it doesn't collect condensation in the future. Don't need to get these too tight. 1 finger tight is a good measurement. Got the clutch housing covers back on and the drain plugs back in. I'm gonna leave these side handhold covers off until I fill it. But I do think it's time to put oil in this behemoth. It holds 12 quarts. I like to watch and see how it flows down into the pan and about how high it sits once it's full. I'm gonna run Rotella T4 conventional 1540. Considering what these machines came with, this will be good stuff. If I don't spill it everywhere. I've got 3 gallons of oil in it. You can see right about where it rides in the pan. just under the front and rear baffles. Now these engines don't use a dipstick, they actually use these plugs here. There's technically a higher and a lower. And originally, I believe, when these tractors were run on distillate or kerosene, you would have an unclean burn, and a lot of times you would get kerosene dilution in your oil, but that would be lighter than oil, so it would float to the top. And what you could do is you could open this lower plug, and it would drain off the kerosene from the day or the week, and then fill it back up to the upper plug. But to check it, you just open the plug, and if oil runs out, it's full. Simple, but I do believe a dipstick is a superior method. Before I put these side covers back on, I'd like to crank this engine over and check out the oil pressure and make sure all the bearings are getting lubricated. So I'm going to throw the starter back in real quick. Since this starter has an O-ring, I added a little oil inside the housing. Getting a 12-volt battery because that's what I've got on hand. I know I had a little issue with that starter smoking the last time I put a 12-volt battery in, but I believe it was just the oil that was soaked inside of it. So I don't think that's a real concern. So hey. It helps if you don't whack your light with a connecting rod and crankshaft. Don't leave that in there. Whoops. Like to crank it till I see some oil pressure here. Alright, well, my handy battery is junk, so let me grab a charger. Alright, let's try that again. Well, it seems like we got decent compression, so let me maybe pull the plugs out and that'll help us wing it over, because we'll need those out for the next step anyhow. Pulled the plugs out, let's try to crank it now. And I still got smoke coming from this starter. I think I grab a 6-volt battery. I don't know. It's looks like just oil coming out of stuff, because you can see it around the brushes. I think it's okay. Famous last words. I swapped that battery out with a known good battery, and it's still cranking pretty slow, so I'm thinking we either got a ground or a starter issue, but by the smoke the starter's making, even after cleaning it with some contact cleaner, I'm thinking we may need to take this to get rebuilt. But all the bearings have got oil coming out of them, so that is good. We've got oil being fed back to our clutch. You can see that oil dripping down that clutch back there. So everything in here looks good. We're just starting to get oil up to the rockers. You can see a couple drips hanging from the bottoms of them, which is great. And I swapped that battery out for a 6-volt, and the starter seems a lot happier. I suspect I'm gonna have to take this to a shop and get it rebuilt, but for now I'm gonna try to nurse it along to at least get this thing running. Next up on the list, we got oil and everything. I got all the covers back on there. Got the starter cranking it again. The exhaust valve retainers. This one that is worn and is threatening to come off the valve needs to come apart. So what I'm going to try to do is put air pressure in these cylinders, and then that'll hold the valves up, and hopefully I can smack the retainer loose and the keepers come out, and I can swap the new parts on. Before I get too far along with any of this, I need to stuff some rags down here, so if any keepers come out, hopefully they don't end up down in the engine. I'm going to use this adapter I made out of an old spark plug for testing compression. I just put an air chuck fitting in the other end, and we'll screw it in and just hook up the air line. And I believe this cylinder is already on the compression stroke. You're gonna have to listen to me over the gurgling of the intake and this compressor, but the idea is we're gonna try to pop this loose, the valve will stay up, and we can swap out the keeper. Here's the new one-piece valve spring retainer. These are the rotary style. There, so now the retainer is loose, and I should be able to pry that down and pull the keepers out. Of course, that keeper went somewhere. Got it. Just getting in here and wiping this down while I can. Hopefully once you get it running, that intake valve seals up a little better, but that's a slim possibility. I'm gonna put the new used retainer on there. Well, they seem to be in there. I guess while I'm here, might as well do the rest of them. So, definitely got an exhaust leak. Oh, there we go. Just had an exhaust valve hanging up. A little bit of an intake leak on that one, but mostly just the exhaust. can hear there where it quits trying to open the valve. The keepers are starting to come out. Maybe this is the one that was real scary. It sure looks scary now. I hope there's keepers in there. Sheesh. I thought it was number 4. Maybe it was number 1. I don't know. It's been 6 months, 8 months, 10 months maybe since I started this project. Aha! Took chunks out of my fingers. Don't do that. That hurts. Give me a minute to go put my fingers back together. Okay, after that brief intermission, I have reassembled my fingertips enough to finish this job. Hindsight being 2020. Don't use a pickle fork to take your valves apart. At least not in the manner that I'm doing it. Make yourself a nice tool to leverage off of something. But that said, I'm going to finish this up the way I already started. 3 out of 4 ain't bad. This must have been the rough one. You could see where it's been wearing into the bottom of this rocker arm. Sure, that won't create some stress riser and a future problem, but you know, cross that bridge when you get there. Boy, that's a wily one. Good thing my fingers weren't in the way that time. Now gather the parts and find them. I think one went over here. Like I said, these springs aren't real strong, but they ain't that weak either. Alrighty, got all the valve spring retainers and a couple of the keepers swapped out. We are no longer rubbing our rocker arms with our retainers, which is exactly what we were after. Things don't look the greatest as far as damage from condensation, but it is a sight bit better than what we were working with. And these things like this one is literally crumbling apart. I think it's a good thing we didn't start it with that equipment in there. But if you look, I don't know if you can even compare those two, but the one on the right, like this was off number 1, and it's just totally rusted and wallered out. That's why it was sitting up so high. Now that we got those valve retainers taken care of, and we've got oil in the machine, we've got it cranking over, we've got to look into that issue of it's not making spark. I'm going to start off by re-verifying that it's not making spark, because you never know when something sits for 6 months. It could fix itself. Crazier things have happened. This should work. Screwed into the block. That's not working. Got to put it where I can see it. Up top. I don't know if you could see that, but playing with the spark advancing retarder, there's spark. That is awesome, because parts for these magnetos are like impossible to find. And a used one, well, of course they're all used at this point, but one like on eBay is like $300 just for a parts one. You know, I think around 1980 when JI Case got bought out, these magnetos and a lot of the parts for these tractors was that was it. They were done with it. All this old stuff, I believe Tenneco bought JI case. Might be wrong. Leave a comment if I am. But around then, everything was discontinued. So anything in stock was used and anything else got rid of. But let's check this carburetor and get some fuel in it. This thing might run and drive today. Man, that's freaking awesome. So looking in the tank of this thing, it's really good condition. But it's got just a little bit of fuel all the way around the outside. And it's varnished. It's nasty smell, like kind of when it starts to turn tar. So this tank really needs to come off and get swished around and cleaned out. But the fuel valve is off, so I don't think the carburetor is full of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go grab a small little pony tank and put that on here and see if we can bypass and get the carburetor to hold fuel. And if that's the case, maybe this thing runs. Man, I'm getting excited now. This thing is just some fresh gas away from running. And I've been so busy I haven't been able to get to it, but I've seen it every time I'm in the shop here. It's where it's been. And I'm just waiting to get worked on. Man, it's clear. A little gross, but it's clear. It blew into this end of this line. I can't get the taste out of my mouth now. Stale gasoline. I think that'll ride there. I imagine once this thing gets going, it's going to drink some fuel, so I want this to be as full as I can get it. Oh boy, that's fresh fuel. Man, I think we got it made, buddy. I think we're gonna get this thing running. I don't think it had any of that old fuel in it. Somebody drained it out when they parked this machine. I've got the spark plugs back in and the wires hooked up. I've got the fuel turned on and it looks like we've got good clean fuel into the carburetor. So really, the only thing that's left is to just try to crank this thing up. I don't know if it'll have enough oomph in that starter to get it going. If that's the case, we'll get a tractor out and pull start it. Hopefully the first startup of the 1949 Case LA. If this 6-volt battery has enough oomph. I can't believe it fired up. cleared up. It's not smoking. It burned all that oil out of it. Boy, that makes me so happy. No weird noises, no knocking. Transmission's got a little growl to it. Oh no, I might have to have the PTO engaged for the hydraulics to work. I think that's this one. That's your spark. Your throttle's on the right. Look at that thing. That's just awesome. Finally, the 1949 JI Case LA is alive. It's been a long time coming, like 9 months, most of which I just haven't had a chance to work on this thing, and was a little bit procrastinating because that magneto just didn't have spark. And I tried before several times to get some spark out of the thing, and I couldn't do it. But I read a forum post recently, and there was a guy that said that his was really particular. You just had to get it in the right spot to get spark. And I fiddled with it while I was cranking it over and it got spark. But now once it's running, it doesn't seem to matter where you have it in the advance or retard range, but it's got spark now. So not gonna complain about that. I guess some things do fix themselves when you leave them sit. But as far as this thing goes and the future of it here, I believe it's got a future. It's a nice machine for something built in 1949. It doesn't have a ton of wear on it. I think it's got quite a few belt hours on it, just judging by how it's set up. But overall, try to find a nicer old LA. They did build quite a few of these, 30-some thousand of them. I think a lot got scrapped and rotted out west. You don't see a lot of them around here in like the Midwest, but this is just generally a good machine. Like I said, the steering wheel doesn't have a ton of wear. It's got the original gauges in it, which I thought they worked, but now it looks like this one's stuck. And it's just a little sticky. Might have put a set of gauges in it, which is unfortunate, but maybe I could find someone to rebuild those. But overall, it's a great tractor. But what does it need from here forward? Well, it's going to need the fuel tank cleaned out. It's going to need the starter probably rebuilt. I mean, I'm going to get a little bigger 6-volt battery, and I'm going to clean the connections. It doesn't have to crank over much. I mean, it started itself several times there. So, and it's got a small battery and possibly dirty connections. So that might work. Got to make a valve cover gasket for it. Probably adjust the valves. Check the fluids in the rear end. Adjust the clutch brake. But a big job is going to be the rear brakes on this thing. It needs, I'm not sure if it's the master cylinders or the slave cylinders, but these are hydraulic brakes, and they have gigantic drums in the back. And this whole outer part here is the cast center, and that's all got to come off. This one on the right is all wet, so I'm assuming that one leaked out. That could be gear oil. but you got your two little master cylinders down here. So I'm gonna look into that. Maybe we can add some fluid. I gotta see what it takes, if it's a brake style fluid or if it's like a hydraulic fluid, I'm not sure. But lots of little things, and I'll be sure to film them in the future. But for right now, I'm gonna call this an end to this video. A total success. I didn't expect it to run this good, especially after the trouble I had getting that engine broke loose. But once it was running and up to temp and had all that oil burned out of it from when we broke it loose, it seemed to clear up. It seems to run great. So that's awesome. I plan to keep it around here, play with it in the future. I'm gonna get a few things buttoned up on it right now and probably get it out of the shop, because I'd really like to work on that Alice Chalmers road grader that I bought recently and get that thing running. So hopefully you like this video, and it seems like y'all liked the last one on this tractor a whole lot. It might just have been my unorthodox methods, but hopefully you enjoyed this one just as much, and you stick around for ones in the future, because there definitely will be more on this tractor. But until then, appreciate y'all watching, and I'll see you on the next one.